Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. It's a pleasure to be here this evening with you all and to welcome you here for the conference that's being held over the next few days. It's a pleasure. I'm Lisa Tumahai. I'm the chair of Ngāi Tahu, and it's an honour to be here on behalf of our local Ngāi Tahu hapu to welcome you all here and to also extend welcomes to our distinguished guests. Tū mai rā e aku whakaruruhau no tū whakahaere. O maki mai rā nā wai tuku, kiria te kahui kāhika. Haere mai rā e te piriman, me nā iwi o te motu. Kua tutuki rā ai te kōrero. He pirita whakapiripiri, he pakiti whakatiki. He huia whakahuihui, he tui waiata whakatuitui. Tā te tangata, he whakawhanaunga. Nō reira, rau rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora. So I've just welcomed you all in our language, in our te reo Māori. Also acknowledged our wonderful Prime Minister, Honourable Jacinda Ardern, and also our distinguished guest here today, the former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, and also like to acknowledge our Mayor, Mr. Jim Bolt. So kia ora all. As I said, I'm here today to welcome you all to the Aspiring Conversations, a workshop brought to you by the Festival of Colour. It's my honour to welcome you on behalf of our local mana whenua, and it's great to see so many of you here. Ngāi Tahu has a long history supporting the Festival of Colour, and it is great to be here today to support this weekend. When you look through the program, it's clear to see you'll have a wonderful weekend of seminars that truly get us all thinking. Over the weekend, I hope you enjoy and learn from the speakers and pick up new ideas for innovation. I know this event could not have happened without the wonderful support of the partners, the staff. I'd like to thank you all, to those involved in the mahi of bringing this all together. Without that support, this wouldn't be taking place. So nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, and I'd like to welcome the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern.
Tēnā koutou katoa ki mana whenua, kai tahu tēnā koutou. Mō tēnei kaupapa Aspiring Conversations ki te mihi. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I want to begin by thanking Ngāi Tahu and Lisa and other representatives of Ngāi Tahu, mana whenua of Wanaka, for welcoming us here this evening. And I'm told that Wanaka is Ngāi Tahu dialect for wānanga, or place of learning, which feels like a very fitting name given the aspiring conversations that we're all taking part in this weekend. I share Lisa's acknowledgement of the Mayor Jim Bolt. I believe that the Deputy Mayor may also be with us, Kellen McLeod. Alistair King, Chair and Trustees of Southern Lake Arts Festival Trust, and also one of the locally based Labour MPs who is here, Liz Craig. But can I first of all thank all of you? Because after all, it wouldn't be much of a conversation if you weren't here. And it would also be remiss of me not to put front and centre the presence of Mary Robinson, the first female president of Ireland and former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and Special Envoy on Climate Change, amongst many, many other things. You'll hear more about her and from her soon, but can I take the opportunity to say thank you for joining us here in New Zealand and here tonight. I consider you a true shining light. But my duty for now is to launch this wonderful event and the weekend of exchange and discussion around politics and science and history, music and entertainment. And I can't imagine a better time to be doing this. You hear a lot of talk these days about the concept of fake news. I wonder whether it has coincided with an ever busy world where we are bombarded with information, with a tendency to surround ourselves with opinion more often than fact. It's not something I think we should place any blame around. The challenges we face are often large and are overwhelming, and we're often confronted with ideas that are contrary to our values. It's perhaps natural to retreat to a safe place, a place full of opinion. But increasingly those safe places aren't what they once were. They're often online, isolated, full of opinions we already agree with and reinforce our existing thoughts, preconceptions and ideas. And perhaps most importantly, they are missing one special thing: people. I had the privilege recently of speaking with Barack Obama. Of the many things he could have reflected on in the short time we had together, it was the need now more than ever to talk to one another, face to face, to expose ourselves to human interactions that challenge us, that trigger thought and discussion and debate, and hopefully, from my personal perspective, trigger human empathy and trigger kindness. That is the kind of engagement that I think this festival generates. And as someone who constantly pontificates about our collective future, I thank all of those who have been part of creating this opportunity. I thank all of those who have come to join it and to participate in this event. May we all be challenged, and may we all be inspired. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for your warm.
And put you in centre stage. I don't get to do that very often. Thank you.
We have water convenient behind
Water
us.
behind you. Ladies, how are we going with those microphones? I've got a loud voice, but I'd love some assistance. Thank you. Well, tēnā koutou katoa, e mihi nuhi, ki ta mana whenua o tēnei rohi, ko kaitahu. Thank you so much, Lisa, and everyone, for that lovely welcome. Thank you all for being here. May I welcome you on behalf of Aspiring Conversations and on behalf of our two very, very, very special guests tonight. Mary Robinson, the first woman President of Ireland and former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Please welcome Mary. And Jacinda Ardern in her capacity as Prime Minister of New Zealand. Please welcome. Now, before we plunge into the topic of working for change and what it takes to effect change, let me please thank the sponsors, Milford Asset Management, who helped make this Ideas Festival possible. Sponsors are a key component of arts festivals. This is a very special one. It's very dear to my heart. It's why I come back. And it takes so many people to make it happen, so please let's acknowledge them. And so to you as the audience, and we'll be coming to you towards the end of the session. There'll be a chance to follow up the discussion with some of your questions. I'm just going to move my seat back a little bit like this. And feel free to position yourselves as you would.
You can't do
You
anything.
can't really go back.
No, I'm trapped.
We need
metaphor
room
for my life.
We need room for brilliance. Because to set something of a framework for what I hope will be a conversation more than an interview tonight, I would love
We've had enough of those.
Oh, we've
with you,
really
Catherine.
had enough of those. We're over it. I would really love for both of you to almost forget that we are here. We have someone for decades with the distinguished achievements that Mary has. We have someone at the early stages of an exciting career, stepping up to the top job, and we would love to just listen and learn from both of you tonight. So I hope that'll be our tenor, and if I don't speak again tonight, that's brilliant. They'll agree. Mary Robinson is a passionate advocate for gender equality, for women's participation in peace building and human dignity. As a barrister, she sought to use the law as an instrument of social change, arguing landmark cases before the European Court of Human Rights. She also knows the value of using informal channels. She is one of the elders, an international group of senior statespeople who work behind the scenes. I think Nelson Mandela may have been the founder. And the heart of her work for change now is her foundation for climate justice. Jacinda Ardern heads a government that has pledged major change on issues ranging from child poverty to climate change action, education to regional development, workers' rights to possible tax reform. And they've made a number of steps in their first 100 days and plan to build on these in the course of this year and beyond. The Prime Minister has to manage the three very different parties which form the government. I think this is our most complex MMP arrangement to date. And also to take New Zealanders with her as these changes come into effect. Change can come in different and complex ways at the local, national, international level. Some changes appear to come quite suddenly, and an Act of Parliament can formalise a major change in people's thinking. It's already occurred and it's formalised. Think gay marriage or medicinal cannabis. Other changes are glacially slow, achieving peace in Ireland, or international action on climate change. Mary, let's begin with that. Peace in Ireland, it took literally centuries to achieve. And in the end, it felt like it came quite quickly. What were the key elements in achieving those peace accords?
Well, first of all, can I just make a comment on the start of this evening? How nice it was to see all women up here at the beginning of the evening. Now, that's nothing against men, but being as old as I am, I've been the one woman on a male panel so often that I really, really enjoyed the fact that we had a difference, a very nice difference this evening. Peace in Ireland, yes, we longed for it for so long, and it was so difficult to see how we would achieve peace. There were many, many hands to that peace, many, many hands. There were people working on it on the ground in Northern Ireland. And again, I come back to women. Women came out of their housing estates to stop their young being kneecapped. They were sick of it. They were sick of the violence. And they met each other, tentatively. The men didn't. And they were the ones that I tried to link with when I became president. And we had a number of opportunities to invite them to come down to visit us in my official residence in Dublin, and you should have seen them. They preened themselves up. I've never seen anything like it. They dressed up, the lipstick, the rest of it, because they'd never been down to Dublin, they'd never been to an official residence, and when they came, it was wonderful, together. And that was a small piece. There were, Americans who were helping, there were Europeans who were helping. It's hard to make peace. It's very, very hard. And it's grindingly difficult, and it's slow, and it has hiccups, and you work at it. And it was Yeats who said, peace comes dropping slow. So when you have a successful peace agreement, cherish it and celebrate it. And that peace agreement in Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement and the executive committee that followed, it was celebrated. It's slightly at risk now with Brexit, slightly. I don't think it's a main risk, but there is a little bit of a risk. And to put something like that at risk is difficult for my country. You know, we're looking at our neighbour across the way and saying, why are you doing this to us? I mean, we've had such good relations, and somehow a little bit now more problematic.
You took some bold and important steps after the signing of those accords, making the first official visit to London and to the Queen. There was the controversy the time you first met with Gerry Adams
Yes.
of Sinn Féin.
And they were very closely related, which I didn't fully plan. As it happened, the Queen invited me to come and have tea with her, and that was a very big event because no Irish president had done that before. And then it wasn't a visit to Belfast to shake hands with Gerry Adams. It was the 6 communities that I had related to on various things, one of them environmental issues, women's issues, and who invited me to this very isolated West Belfast. And I felt, you know, if there's one thing I must do this. Because unless I do this, I'm not keeping faith with them. You know, they won't believe that I trust them like I want to trust them and I want them to trust me. And it did open up a big space, more than I felt at the time, and it's been repeated to me afterwards. I still remember, and I'm sure Nick, who's in the audience, my husband, will remember going into that hall in West Belfast and the kind of sense of joy, of relief, of excitement was unbelievable, you know, because for once they were in the sun, for once, out of a beleaguered community, and that was worth doing. And, you know, I got criticism afterwards, and then luckily they took a poll in Ireland, and 92% of the Irish people agreed with me. You know, polls will help you, or not.
What I love about that is the poll came after the action.
Yeah, exactly.
It didn't drive the action. Prime Minister, you've come in with an ambitious agenda. Can you first sketch out for us why you feel a need for change and what the essence of that change is? So many countries look on at us, our relative peace, our relative economic okayness, relative to so much of the world. What's at the heart of the change you believe we need?
That use of the word okayness that doesn't, that I don't think sits well with us as New Zealanders and with who we are. I mean, I think we've always placed great stock in the fact that we're always driving for better, and we take such pride in being, holding those firsts and being ranked highly on things that matter and that we care about. And so I never want to see us be complacent, not because we're competitive, but because that's not who we are. We believe in fairness. We believe in those old notions of there being equality. And so for me, it's actually driving for better because we've had it before, and I think we can have it again. For me, it actually is very personalised, though. It's not about looking at those reports at a desk that show us where we're ranked. You know, I talk often about the things that I think drove me into politics, and I think you've got 2 types of politicians. I'm not sure if it's like this in Ireland, but you've got those who love the sport. Those who, Malcolm Tucker-style characters, who love the idea of walking around the office swearing and cursing at the thing that they're facing that day. And then there's those who are there in spite of the sport, who don't enjoy the cut and thrust, who actually just believe politics is a place where you can make change. I put myself in that latter category. And the thing that drove me to politics, first and foremost, actually was seeing in this little small rural community when I was growing up, as a small child, in a town called Murupara, during the 1980s, rapid economic change that led to massive deprivation. And through the eyes of a child, that just looks like the kids around you not having food to eat at school, or not having shoes when it's a cold, cold place. And I just remember that embedding something in me. Now, it took a while. As a 5-year-old, I wasn't shaking my head at Rogernomics. It took a number of years, but eventually I came to the view that first I wanted change and that second politics was the place to do it.
Do you need that fire? Mary, if I can come back to you for a moment. You were talking about how you were almost the exception growing up and that you had equality in your family with the brothers. And
well, I had to fight for it with the brothers, and that taught me the importance of human rights and equality. But it was from my parents that I felt I had every opportunity my brothers had, which was different from the Irish society at the time, where women knew their place and girls knew their place. Girls were inferior to boys. I mean, that was it. That was just how it was. And it was just extraordinary that I had this security in my family of knowing that I was equal to my brothers and that I would have the same opportunities and my parents would support me in those opportunities. I think it was I was very lucky to have that grounding because it was a bit unusual at the time. I mean, women either became nuns or got married or were lucky to be creative and could get out of all of that and do whatever they wanted to do.
Prime Minister, for you, you worked in the soup kitchen in New York. When you were younger, you led the International Union of Socialist Youth. What was happening then? Was it this, whatever you saw as a young person, that you felt was it like a responsibility or a burden, or what was driving it?
Well, it certainly didn't come from Morrinsville, because, you know, I grew up Mormon, so relatively conservative background there. I grew up in a rural community, both Murupara and Morrinsville. So really, people often question me, where did those ideals come from? On the one side of my family, my mother's side, they're a farming stock. And right up until the day my grandmother passed, you know, she was proud of where I was. She just wished I was in another party. So, and she would openly say it, openly. To this day, bless her, I maintain she chose to pass 3 days before the election. She would never have to vote Labour. So it didn't come from that. So I then have to question, you know, what was it? It wasn't anything particularly tribal. It was very intuitive for me. It was very much the sense. Would you
describe it at all as a sense of justice?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what fires me.
Yeah,
absolutely.
a gut instinct of what felt right and what felt wrong.
A sense of justice, fairness, what's right.
Yeah.
And we have to do things better. You know, I very much agree. Yeah.
And I can't imagine how you sustain yourself, anyone sustains himself in a political venture without having such grandiose motivations, such intuitive motivations, because it's hard slog. But that motivation never runs out.
But I went into law as an instrument for social change. You, I think, went a different way. Tell me about that.
Well, I actually did want to go into law, but my father was a policeman and he told me if I went into law, he'd write me out of the will. And I told him if I went into law, I would just write myself back in again.
Right on. So why didn't you?
Oh, well, look, yeah, I mean, in the end, I was the only second person in my family to go to university. It was a very big deal, and I chose a career based on what I thought, a course of study that I thought would get me a job. I never had particularly lofty goals for myself. My mother wanted me to leave school early to go to Polytech to learn to be a PA, like my cousin Lynn, because she earned good money. My father wanted me to be a policewoman. And so my aspirations I always kept pretty well in check. And so I went to university to study communications because I thought I'd get a good job and I'd be able to pay my way. And that was the extent.
And was your father happy about that?
Well, when I said to him I wanted to study history, he was less happy about that. He told me to learn how to say, "Do you want fries with that?" because that would be my future.
But he's doing interesting work on small islands now.
He is, absolutely. And he has changed his views over the years, but constantly worried for me. And I don't know, your family were doctors, weren't they?
Yeah, both my parents were doctors. My two older brothers, one of whom is sitting in the audience, Oliver, were doctors. And I changed. I went to the law, and my two younger brothers followed me to the law. So we made the majority of children be lawyers. Very boring family, doctors and lawyers. But my father did have a great influence on my life, and it sounds as if yours did on yours.
Very much so.
Yeah,
very much so. For better, I make him sound terrible. He's wonderful. For better.
Yeah.
So here we have the drive for change, which one presumes, Mary, you need to sustain for a very long time. Prime Minister may agree, sustaining it for 5 months, you need it. This is a tough job. 100 days plan. Ticked off a lot of that agenda, ticked off all of that agenda. There were a lot of things started or initiated, and there were a lot of reviews started. What are you finding already, though, are going to be the constraints on what can happen in the first term and what is going to take longer? When you look at the change you want to implement, where are you at already?
You know, these constraints are actually the distractions in a lot of ways. I don't find driving the policy agenda hard. That's the bit I get joy from. It's the political distractions that really, I think, deter you from the path, they sidetrack you. Those are the things I find the most difficult about politics. When I think about the things I'm excited about, it's the fact that we have this opportunity to bring New Zealand onto a path that will last beyond 3 years, that will go beyond me as an individual politician or even a one after me and take us forward, because the challenges we're facing right now, like climate change, they are not 3-year problems, they're not 6-year problems. And so what we're spending a lot of time on at the moment is building the infrastructure to challenge them, to say, actually, climate change, we all need to commit. So let's have a Zero Carbon Act. Let's bind ourselves to that commitment across all stripes. And we're trying to do the same with child poverty. Now, if we can set up that framework, then I'll know that moment in Parliament where they have this tradition where they announce at the beginning of a sitting session any MP who has passed. They announce their name and we have a minute's silence. And it was the first time a name was read out and I didn't recognise it, that it really was jarring. I thought, we're just moments in time in this place. We all think we're so important. But there'll be a time when my name is read out and no one will even know who I am. But if they know what happened in 2018 or 19 on climate change or child poverty, I'll be happy with that.
But you had a more difficult task than I had when I was elected President of Ireland, because in my inauguration, I set out what I hoped I could do. I didn't really know how I was going to do some of it, because I wanted to be a voice for human rights in the world.
Same.
I didn't know at all. I think, but it was up to me in more of a way. I mean, with support and with the thing. Whereas you have to manage a three-party that I'm becoming familiar with, and get the support of the people of this country.
Did you just liken that to the Troubles? Because that's quite a big comparison.
Well, I think what I'm thinking about is, when you say you really enjoy the policy end, I'm glad to hear it, because that's the tough end. And I'm very glad to hear you talk about climate change the way you do, because that's my passion now. I mean, I've gone from taking cases as a lawyer in the Irish courts and then taking cases against Ireland in the courts in Europe, when Ireland wasn't doing what we should be doing under the European Union or the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, and using law to keep moving us forward, to then being a president of my country at a very particular time, 1990 to 1997, Ireland was changing, but it was up to me very largely, not in an egotistical way, but I either did what I was going to do or not. I didn't have parties in the same way. I had to live well with successive Taoiseachs. I had 4 Taoiseachs during my time, as it happened, 4 prime ministers. I had to forge a good relationship with each of them. But that was the height of my policy in that sense making. But now, having served as High Commissioner for Human Rights for 5 years after that, I didn't make a connection with climate change. Now I so much do. The injustice of climate change, and also that we're facing a fact that we're not on top of it. We're not on course for a safe world for our children and grandchildren. And you've got a bump there.
It's quite a bump.
There's actually no voice in the UN system for your bump and her children and grandchildren. I don't know if it's a he or she, by the way.
Just made a little guess there. So she doesn't know anything special.
I'm only guessing. But that generation will potentially be the most affected by whether we do or don't do what we should in the future.
So, Prime Minister, where you're at now, the distractions are not going to go away.
Politics.
Taking the politics out of politics, we've been trying to do that for years. So you're dealing with that. You're dealing with the complications of a three-way governing arrangement. So tell me again where your thinking is at. Pick a topic. Pick the 2 big ones, whether it's child poverty or climate change. And what are you already thinking about how you're going to make this happen?
Child poverty, I'd love.
Child poverty, I'm happy to speak to that one. I mean, I think probably when I was in opposition, one of the things that used to frustrate me about the debate was that there even was politics in it. But ultimately, politics actually is just a conversation about different values and different ways of seeing the world. And you can take the anger out of it if you realise that actually we probably want the same destination, we just have different views on how to get there, which is probably why I get a little less tribal than some of my counterparts in the House. But the thing that used to frustrate me is that we would have these discussions about child wellbeing that often didn't include anything about deprivation.
Yes.
We didn't talk about the impact of just inadequate incomes on children, and yet I would read these reports that would from children themselves, where they would say, through the Children's Commissioner, things like, I don't ask mum and dad about whether I can learn the guitar because I know it costs too much, or I want to play hockey but I know they can't afford the fees. And right through to the things we see in the news around kids not having enough school lunch. And I found instead of having the debate about what do we do about our low-wage economy and the fact that we have this growing disparity, that instead of that we jump straight to this conversation around parental responsibility. And that meant we never moved anywhere. And I often would wonder, look, if we just took that noise out and looked at the child, what would we think was fair and right? And it would change the debate entirely if you just thought about a blameless child who never has any say in where they're born, they're where they are, and what responsibilities do we have to them. Now, that for me was really at the heart of it. And of all the reports, evidence I've read, meetings I've had with a range of providers, I've spent years in this space. To be honest, I'm yet to meet a parent who doesn't want better for their child than what they had.
Absolutely.
I'm yet to meet one.
Absolutely.
A lot of people have stuff go on in their lives, a lot of people make mistakes, but at their heart, they want better for their kids. And so for me, it's about government has a role
So what's your
in
theory of
assisting them.
change?
My theory of change is that providing the support that makes that happen. Now, we can't look past low incomes because that's what drives our child poverty rates. We can't look past the fact that we have that growing disparity. And those are all levers we have something that we can do with. In the 1980s and 90s, that's where we saw our child poverty rates go up. We had cuts in the 1990s, that's when it spiked. When it first came down, it was working for families. So what we do makes a difference.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you because, you know, Ireland went through a financial crisis and we've come out of it in a good way. The Irish economy is doing well. We've got a Brexit problem looming, but we're doing well at the moment. But the inequality is growing.
Yes.
Is that happening here?
Yes, it is. And so, again, government has some say in that, what we do around minimum wage, what we do to try and drive an economy where people are on higher wages.
What about supports for children who've been traumatised, mental health issues? What about those?
And that's where, look, we can talk about income, but actually in lots of ways that's the easy stuff. Parental support, the support that we provide from the day baby's born, we could do so much more. Because, you know, I think we have this assumption that everyone has this community around them when they're looking after young ones in that really stressful time of life. Not everyone does. And I visited a plunket program in the Hawke's Bay once where they'd seen this and decided that they were going to provide plunkets, a universal nurse and home program in New Zealand. They were going to provide extra support for young mums. And I was talking to the nurse who was running it. And she said to me, I work with a particular young woman who's in a violent relationship. And she said, I never thought I'd see it change, but I got to know this young woman. I visited every week, and she visited week after week. And one day, she was teaching this young woman about attachment and how important it was for a baby to feel safe, secure, with at least one caregiver. She came back the next week, and this young mum sat down with her and said, I need your help. She said, I had a huge row with my partner. He didn't hit me this time, but I was holding baby. For the rest of that week, baby wouldn't settle, wouldn't let me put her down, just wouldn't let me be away from her. She said, it's affecting my attachment. And she said, I have to leave, and I need your help to do it. Now, that powerful connection with someone who could support her, but also that power of knowledge, knowing the effect that that relationship was having, that to me is the hard stuff, but the area of child wellbeing where we can make the biggest difference. Never assume that support and that network is around people, but always make sure it's there.
And what is the taxation implication of that?
Of providing something like universal... When I sized how much it would cost us to put extra plunket visits in the home for 20,000 vulnerable families, it was less than $10 million. Why don't we do it? Well, we plan to, so there's the answer.
I'm interested, it always occurred to me that the previous National Prime Minister, Bill English, who was here 2 years ago, I don't know how many of you were here for the session we did with Max Harris and Bill English, where he reiterated what he said before, that prisons are a fiscal and moral failure. And he actually turned to the audience and said, you're part of the problem because of that politics. But I'm interested in how...
You're part of the problem. What have you done about it then?
Well, polls. I'm interested, I could barely see paper between the two of you and the outcome that you wanted, but I could see politics between you. I'm going to be cheeky. Was there a missed opportunity between you and him? Because if you're talking, he has a different approach, a more targeted approach, as a Conservative Party often does. But he wanted intensive intervention in families and communities that were really in trouble.
Yeah.
Was that an opportunity where you could have got that cross-parliamentary agreement?
Probably. I tried a couple of times. I wrote to Paula Bennett a couple of times and said, can we work together? But maybe that wasn't seen with the intent that I had. I did have genuine belief that we could make those issues cross-party. We have with domestic violence. I should say that. When National were in, we wrote to them and said, let's work on domestic violence together, and Amy Adams said yes. I credit her with that. So there are issues where we do it. But yeah, there probably is an opportunity. There is a slight difference in our approach. I don't know about you, but I'm a big believer in proportionate universalism. Do something for everybody, and for people who need a bit more, scale it up.
Yeah.
And whereas probably where Bill English was quite interested in going was much more and more targeted. So these ideas of, Plunkett, what a treasure. That's the kind of philosophy that I really believe in, scaling up what we need the most for those who need it most.
Mary, one of the barriers of the political systems that this Prime Minister is operating in is just that. And have you seen examples in your long career? I mean, if you look at Washington, it is completely paralysed. 20, 30 years ago, Republicans and Democrats would get together and compromise or come up with a program. But what does it take to reach across the aisle if you seriously are trying to make change that lasts a change of government or that isn't kneecapped by politics?
I think we're going through a difficult phase to a certain extent globally at the moment. I mean, the United States is an example of quite a polarized society, aggravated by social media generally and social media, because people watch what reinforces their conviction. They get reinforced all the time, and it's not opening them to the other. And in Europe, it's happening as well. We have, polarized right now. We have populist parties of left and right. And we have the rise of the autocratic figure, male autocratic figure, as being somehow somebody who can cut through this and solve our problems for us, which is a terrible indictment of democratic principles that we should be reinforcing. The idea that we look to the strong man. I mean, Trump wants to be the strong man to make America first. Xi in China is the strong man to make China first. Turkey is making Turkey first. Philippines is making Philippines first. And it's not a good mood for our world. But I go back to what the world achieved, and it still matters hugely, in 2015. Not so long ago, we're still early 2018. In 2015, the negotiators on behalf of governments of the world, over 195 countries in both cases, came together and had the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, leaving no one behind, and even prioritizing the furthest behind first. I love that phrase, seeking out and prioritizing the furthest behind first in policy. So we had living sustainably, and then the Paris Climate Agreement gave us, if you like, the standard we have to reach, which is well below 2 degrees Celsius of warming and working for 1.5 degree. That is still the agenda for the world. That's still the negotiated agenda. And in many ways, it was brought home to me. I was asked for my sins, I think. I must have sinned greatly. I was asked to chair a high-level panel for the OECD Development Assistance Committee, known as the OECD DAC. Boring, boring, boring stuff. But it was all about how the OECD could somehow link with these Sustainable Development Goals. And actually, what I found, it was the representatives of China and India and Malaysia, who are three of the key developing country representatives on this high-level panel, who kept reminding us this 2030 agenda is a global development agenda for the world. It's for all countries, not like the Millennium Development Goals, which were for developing countries. And they treasured it as being a negotiated agenda, leaving no one behind. And somehow we mustn't forget that. That is our agenda now. That is your agenda in your country. That's Ireland's agenda. It's Europe's agenda. It's the whole world's agenda. And we have to fight back and make that the Sustainable Development Goals, the climate factor on that, and leaving no one behind, a people-centered agenda. And I get the sense that that's what your government is seeking to do. But it is the agenda for our time, and we have to remember that.
How do we do that in an increasing global environment where leaders, not naming any names, leaders...
I can name names.
You can name names. Where leaders are claiming to have a people-focused agenda, but one that is...
It's populist.
It's very nationalistic and populist and closes off borders and therefore has an impact on other. Because they claim to be on the same, focused on a similar people agenda.
Yeah, but it is, as you say, it's populist and national. And the reason why we need the broader solidarity agenda, the 2030 agenda, I mean, the preamble to it is extraordinary in its use of gender and human rights language. I mean, this year we're marking the 70th anniversary of a document that I live by, which is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I marked the 50th anniversary when I was High Commissioner with Nelson Mandela in South Africa. And it was such a privilege to be with him when he launched with me the Universal Declaration year of the 50th anniversary. And he also launched the South African Plan of Action for Human Rights. The 2030 agenda is now the 2015 equivalent of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in its preamble, in its language, in its working towards a sustainable development future, which is not a selfish future, it's a solidarity future. You used the word empathy earlier when you were speaking, and I love that word. We need, because we have different problems in our world of how we get to the sustainable development. The rich countries have to change rapidly from fossil fuel powered energy, which has been the source of our economies, to renewable energy. We have to do it much faster. Really, really drive that agenda fast. Developing countries have to try to develop insofar as possible without emissions. In other words, move to the renewable. But it's very hard for them because no country built its society on no emissions. So it's a new idea for them. India is wonderful in wanting to go so solar so quickly. And we should admire what they're doing. China has become a leader in the world in renewables, in wind, in electric vehicles. They're really trying. The richer parts of the world, particularly, unfortunately, the United States under bad leadership at the moment. Mr. Trump, bad leadership, I can name him. Bad leadership. It's contrary to what the world needs. And when I say the world, what the world needs, because we have a short enough window, as you very well know, short enough window to get this right. And we're sacrificing potentially our children and grandchildren to this populist nationalist stuff. So it's a really tough fight. And you're a young woman leader of this country, and I think you can be a great voice internationally as well as nationally on this issue. I genuinely do.
You did say it was the nuclear free of our time, of our generation. And we know there are plans in track in the domestic agenda. I think moving to the Climate Commission will be a significant practical step here.
do you embrace the idea of what New Zealand could do globally on this? And what is your thinking?
Yeah, in part actually probably over the last 6 months, my thinking has changed a little bit. And describing it as our nuclear free moment, that in a way captures this idea that we want to carve a path for ourselves that's about our own identity. I recently just came from travelling through the Pacific, visiting Samoa, Tonga, Niue, the Cook Islands, hearing the conversation there. I mean, Niue's a rock, it's I think it is height, 60 to 80 metres above sea level. They have low points on that island where they'll say, well, we're not worried about rising sea levels, we're a rock. But when there is a massive weather event, waves that used to lap around the edges of their lowest points of the island are now coming over it. And so even for them, this is a huge issue. In Tonga, they talk about the villages they've already had to relocate and the difference it's making to their food production. And so the upshot of all of these conversations is that, of course, for them it's not a hypothetical and it's not something in the future, it's happening now. And of course, they can speak for themselves. They can share their own stories. They can use the platform they have. We've got to be honest, we've got more of them. We just do. And so now I see this less of an issue where it's just about New Zealand doing its bit, carving a path and showing our ability to lead the way, to actually feeling now like we have a regional obligation and a regional sense of responsibility. We are not neighbours to the Pacific, we are the Pacific. And
I really like what you're saying. I served as Special Envoy for the Secretary General of the United Nations on the path to Paris. And I went in 2014 to Samoa with him for the summit of small island states, not just Pacific, but Caribbean, the whole lot. And I've been to UN conferences which can be terribly boring and very remote from people. I mean, literally, very remote from people. This was different. In Samoa, because they were hosting this important summit for small islands around the world. They had the bunting out on all the roads, they had flowers everywhere, they had balloons. It became a people-owned conference of the like I haven't seen. And the second time I came to this region, to a small island, was in 2015, before Paris. I came to Fiji for the Pacific Small Islands Forum, which is the forum that doesn't include the big, do we call them brothers or sisters? Australia and New Zealand. Are you brother or sister?
Cousins.
Cousins. No, but the interesting thing for me was I was kind of privy to a conversation without the real problem at the time was Prime Minister Howard. I'm naming him again. Prime Minister Howard in Australia, who had said something terrible, I can't remember what it was now, and the Prime Minister of Fiji was hitting back very hard. But that wasn't the whole conversation. The whole conversation was a deeply important conversation for the presidents and prime ministers of these Pacific islands. They had to get the target of 1.5 degrees into the Paris Agreement, or they couldn't come home to their people. That's what they said. We cannot come home without that and luckily we did get it well below 2 degrees and aiming for 1.5 degrees. This September, the international scientists, the IPCC, will issue a report for the first time ever of what it means for the world to stay at 1.5 degrees. And it will kind of scare us. Be prepared that it will kind of be a lesson to us of what we have to do to have a safe world. I'm so pleased that you have a net zero target in your climate. That means getting out of all fossil fuel by 2020, or by 2050. And this is not...
Or planting a lot of trees. We want to do that too.
That too, yeah, all of it, yeah.
But I think the interesting, in terms of making change though, and how you use the word fear, and there is so much fear attached to this issue, both the unknown of what it will mean in the future, but also what changes it will require upon us now. What I'd like to see us do is turn that fear into just opportunity.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Because what better place in the world to do that and to enhance, to grasp the idea of becoming 100% renewable, by changing up our
You
transport
have a much fairer
options.
society.
Yeah, by
Immediately.
changing the way that we produce
Yeah.
food,
Yeah.
we can still be
Yeah.
the food bowl
Yeah.
here in New Zealand. We
Yeah.
can still have
Yeah.
dairy as a massive contributor.
New Zealand and Ireland
But
have
we
that
can
in
do it
common.
better. Absolutely. In fact, I had that conversation with your TSEC about that. But anyway, but we can do it better, and that presents a
Yeah.
huge opportunity.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's important that we do speak about that opportunity future, because if you try to talk about, and it is necessary to say that we're not on course for a safe world. That's true. We're not on course. We need to get on course, but it is doable, and it is much fairer and much better. And I mean, getting light electricity to the 1.3 billion people in the world who never switch the switch for electricity. Think what it'll mean to them. The cook stoves. You know, so many women still cook on coal or wood or animal dung and inhale indoor, about 4 million a year die in the World Health Organization statistics. This is all what the world can move to, not just New Zealand. But I love the idea that when I was elected president, I said that I was very happy to represent the some 70 million people worldwide of Irish heritage. And immediately afterwards, some wit said, there's a typical woman. She's elected by a population of less than 4 million, but she's talking about 70 million already. But you're talking about the region of this. I like it. Continue.
Well, technically, you represent me as well. I think probably half this room is Irish, probably as well.
But Mary, there's a lesson in that, because you talked about going to Belfast and connecting with the women there, or they came to see you.
Yeah.
Your story the whole way has been finding your allies and finding your opportunities and reaching across uncomfortable places. And it occurs to me that it's exactly the same with the conversation we're having, because we're talking about big global problems, we're talking about big change and why we should be doing it and opportunities. And out there are people who are either hurting or feel like they're hurting or feel like they're losing. So Mary, my question to you is what are the qualities of the change-making leader, innate or learned? Who is the person who can cut through that noise and inspire people who may be feeling like, hang on a minute, it sounds great in theory, but it's going to cost my business, or you know what, I'm struggling too, or what are the innate qualities of a change-making leader?
Well, it does help to have an experience of learning from your mistakes. I mean, I made lots of mistakes and learned from them. And, you do acquire a kind of knowledge of how things work. I think at the moment we're making the big mistake of forgetting those who are forgotten, forgetting those who are working in coal, in oil, in gas specifically. The Rust Belt that elected President Trump, they were forgotten by the Democrats. They were neglected. They need what's called a just transition. In my foundation, we work a lot on a just transition. And a just transition has to be a really fair transition for those. For example, if you've worked in a coal mine for 30 years, you deserve to be pensioned off because you contributed hugely to the society. That you shouldn't be asked to retrain at the age of 47 or 48 into something you don't understand and don't want to do, and you're very proud of your past. You know, it should be something, but the younger ones need to be trained now, and we need a whole program globally and in every country that has coal, and then in very near time gas, oil and gas, to ensure that communities are not left behind in that sense. I mean, there are other communities that are left behind. I'm very pleased with the way that New Zealand supports Indigenous communities. You have a lovely relationship with the Maori. I remember coming on a state visit to this country and having a Maori reception at the beginning. And of course I was warned and guided that I must look this guy in the eye and mustn't flinch, and he threw his spear or whatever, you know, and be very brave. And I did all this for my country. And then, and then we went into a close encounter with the elders. And one of the elders grabbed me. May I grab you, Prime Minister? You won't mind? I went, when Irish eyes are smiling. I felt so at home. So, you know, you kind of group with, no, but I think you learn the experience of understanding that if a whole sector are left behind and feel forgotten, they will vote for somebody who will promise anything.
Yeah.
And there are populist promisers out there. So we've got to be very careful in upholding democracy to really, really work very hard now.
I totally agree.
Yeah, work
totally
very
agree.
hard to work back to those who feel that democracy has failed them.
And when you think about Brexit and we think
Yeah.
about other international elections that we've observed, you know, there is a sense, I think, that's been building for some time, where globalisation and then issues like the future of work and increasing automation in New Zealand, 46% of our jobs will either disappear or change in 20 years. And we can either leave people to feel insecure and neglected, and like people aren't recognising that insecurity that they feel, be it job insecurity or just financial insecurity, or if you're living in Europe, that sense that around ongoing migration, that other insecurity.
Migration is a huge issue. Yeah.
You can either, as a political leader, capitalise on that by fear or through hope.
Yeah. You mentioned migration, which is a huge issue at the moment in Europe, and of course we've got the Rohingya and we've got other issues, and we've got issues in this part of the world. But I was in Jordan recently at a children's summit, and I was particularly focusing on children, refugees, migrants, and went to a camp where there was wonderful support, and they were Syrian, all of them. And I said to the Jordanians, you know, what's your approach? Oh, our approach is, these are our neighbouring countries. These are our neighbours. If they're forced to come into our country, they are our guests. You know, these are our neighbours. If they're forced to come into our country, they are our guests. And I mean, I learned of villages and towns in Jordan that have doubled and then trebled and then quadrupled their populations, had to do night school in their schools, and they still have, you know, it's beginning to fracture a little bit of sheer pressure, but their approach is, these are our neighbours who have become our guests. And if only we had that approach more in our world, because migration is a natural phenomenon. I mean, Irish people migrated because of famine, because of conflict over the years, and came to different parts of the world, including here to New Zealand, to Australia, to America, etc. And you know, we don't do enough in Ireland. I don't speak as a former president very vocally about this, but in my heart, I wish we would do more, because, and we do have a ship on the Mediterranean, which is saving lives. But I mean, why should people have to die to go on these traffickers' small boats just because they cannot live in their country?
Prime Minister, what have you learned already, and are you learning about the rate of change? And I mentioned earlier, what are the constraints you're seeing already? But are you at a point now where you can see this is going to be something I believe I can achieve, or we can get a lead out on this, or we can run on this, or we can get our message out on this? And this is going to take longer. You have budget constraints that are evident as well. But where are you at in the process of what you are going to be articulating?
I have a sense that, you know, that coming in, of course, that first 100 days, we started with a real flurry because we had a real sense of what we needed to do quickly and why we needed to do it. And so setting that in train, and I know that a lot of people missed entirely significant parts of that. You know, the program around boosting those low and middle incomes, that kicks in July. That will probably be one of the biggest things we will do in that space as a government. And a lot of people miss that. Does that mean that you slow down and focus more on your comms plan? Not when you've only got 3 years. I'm starting to realise that although 3 years can be both the longest period of your life if you're in opposition, or it can be very, very short. Particularly when you sit down with officials and say, look, I want to institute this program. They'll say, well, look, we'll do 6 months on the design and then 3 months on the consultation and the legislative program. We'll take 2 years. And that is routinely the response I get. So we have been moving at pace, and there is risk in that. But, you know, there's one thing that stood out to me when I had that very brief conversation with Barack Obama, and he said to me, now, I just went in and decided that I could either be a really great president for 4 years, or I could focus on just being an okay president for 8 years. And so he just went in and didn't preserve his political capital. And I think if you're particularly poll-driven or focused in leadership of that style, you could really take a reserved approach to leadership. I haven't really done that. I don't really intend to do it. I do want to bring people with us because I think that's how you create lasting change. But I'm also in a hurry because so many of the things we're trying to do can't wait. I'll give you a little example though of some of the reality of the challenges, because it's often easy to talk about things like investing in schools rather than prisons, which I fundamentally believe in. When we came into office though, I remember having a first meeting with some officials who said, right, here's a projection of the prison population. And I looked at this graph and it said if we changed nothing about the way we were operating, not only would we be building Waikeria prison, rebuilding Waikeria prison, which is currently on the books from the last government, we would be building a new prison every 3 years. Every 3 years. And I said to them, right, well, I don't want to do that because our crime rate is not moving, so why is our prison population taking off? And they ran me all through all of the legislative changes and with the rationale behind it. And I said, well, if I make X or Y changes tomorrow, what's the effect? They said, that's probably going to take you another 5 before it'll even change. So you'll still at least need that one build. I said, I pledged not to build.
I learned a little.
I pledged not to build. And so these are the constraints that you're facing. And that's before you start having a conversation with the public about what we're doing with our justice system, which is hard. No one wants that conversation, but we're going to have it. So that for me is the nub. That's where the rubber hits the road, where you can say these value statements, but actually here's the reality.
But we have observed Prime Ministers who have been criticised for not using their political capital. Are you going to use yours even if there's a cost?
I already am. Have you not noticed? Yes, because do you know why? Speaking very frankly, it'll be obvious to everyone in New Zealand I didn't necessarily plan to be in this amazing privileged position I'm in. 7 weeks out from the last election, I thought I was going to be the deputy leader of the Labour Party right up until election day, and then suddenly I wasn't. There has been a real blessing in that. I don't have a massive ego about my time in politics. I never went into politics sensing that I would ever at this point be in this position, which means I've been gifted this opportunity. And if it means that I last 6 years or 9 years, that's wonderful. But if I can at least come away from whatever time I have and say, I was the best Prime Minister I could be no matter how long my time in office was, then I will feel content.
Mary.
Well, I've been nice to you up to now, but I have an issue for you.
Go ahead.
Yeah. It comes from my brother who lives in this part of the world, in New Zealand. And
I know where you're sitting. We can have words if this doesn't go well.
And we were just driving along and we were having a conversation. He said, you know, sadly in a way, because the Irish suicide rate is quite high, the New Zealand suicide rate is just as high. Just about the same, and the populations are very similar too.
For our young people,
but he said, no, but wait for a Prime Minister. This is the punch. But your road traffic deaths are twice as high as Ireland. Now that's not good. What are you going to do about that?
Oh, good question. You know, in our political system, I would call that question a patsy, because Rachel, I take this one. Do you know, that is exactly right. And this is all about priorities. And we're actually, you might not have noticed, but in a much this excise conversation we're having at the moment, that actually sits at the heart of it.
Oh, good.
You know, we did something a little bit unpopular in Auckland by saying that we weren't going to build this big project called the East-West Link. A very short stretch of road that was going to cost an extraordinary amount of money. For half of the cost of this one project, which was heavily supported by the business community in Auckland, half of it, we could put a medium barrier through the entire state highway network in New Zealand for half of the cost. It's all about what you choose to invest in. So we've said we're decreasing new state highway funding with our new policy statement. We're going to decrease it. No more big dual carriage motorways in our urban centres, because we want to put more priority on safety.
And you need a
So
lot
that's
strong-
the
strong
answer to
road
that
safety
question.
commission.
And we're taking a hit for it.
Yeah.
Well,
We are,
that's my
but I'm
question.
willing to.
I'm going to come to questions from the audience in a moment in the few minutes we have left. So please prepare them succinct, please. And
We don't have to give succinct answers,
get
though, eh?
to as many as we can. But my question to you is this. What if you do take a hit for that? What if people hear tax and, you know...
Well, they do.
So this is my point.
Yeah.
This is going to test the nerve.
Yeah. Yep.
So tonight, when you were sitting here contemplating, you laid out a manifesto, whether it was on climate change, whether it was on transport changes and more trains and public transport. When those polls come through and it's
We're in
ouch,
Wanaka. Talk about the regional roads we talked
Yes.
about.
when those polls come through and it hurts, what are you going to do? If it hurts, what are you going to do?
Oh, look, you don't need polls, you know. You just need to read the stuff comment section. You know, yeah, actually, and that happens. You know, I can sit there and say, you know, feel all frustrated and angsty about, you know, in the last 9 years, excise went up 17 cents. We've talked about 3 cents a year, and you take a real walloping. But actually, that's just politics, and people have perceptions about Labour, and that happens. So I can either get frustrated by that, or I can actually just feel this sense of hope that actually once we start doing the work and people see us following through, that then maybe they'll change their mind. And that might sound optimistic, overly naive, idealistic, but I just have to hope that we can prove ourselves.
And you know one of the best characteristics that I'm seeing in you, and it will stand to you, your sense of humour. It's important. It's very important.
And the key people, Mary. How many key people?
That's my Irish.
Yes,
But
actually,
speak truth
I want
to
to
power.
ask you.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question because I was lucky enough. I had my husband who's in the audience, and when I would speak too long as president, because nobody tells a president or a prime minister they're speaking for too long.
In New Zealand, they do.
But anyway, he would cough, and his cough became quite famous. He would cough to make sure. And I also had, and still have as a good friend, my special advisor as president. And she would tell me the things that I needed to hear, not the things I wanted to hear. Have you got a good advisor?
Do I have to?
And I don't mean Clark, I
Yes,
mean
no.
a good advisor.
I have to now
By the
confess,
clock.
actually, my friend worked for you, and this shows how small both Ireland and New Zealand are. My friend from university worked for you when you were working in the UN. She said her favourite story from you was about that advisor.
Oh.
After you stopped being president, you went shopping together, and she had a big bundle of shopping, and you went to the back of the department store and went into the lift, and you were both standing in the lift,
yes,
and she was
that's
under
a
this
true
mound of
story.
shopping, and you said, gosh, this is a very slow lift, and she said, you're not president anymore, you have to push a
Push the
floor.
button, that's right. True. Very true.
So
Very
to answer
true,
your
very
question,
true.
do I have people like that in my life? So many of them.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just conscious of the generosity of the time of our guests here, but I would love to open the floor to a few questions. If there's someone who has a question on this idea of how we make change. There are microphones. Please wait for the microphone, the roving mic. Is that someone just up top left there? If you hold your hand up, hopefully a microphone's about to arrive. Thank you. Upstairs, thank you very much for that. Just pop your hand up and we'll get some more mics moving. Is there anyone else? Just hold your hand up.
She said you won't remember her,
Ma'am.
but she was...
Hello.
I'll show you her face.
Ma'am, please go ahead.
Thank you. It's such a privilege for each of us to have you here in our wee town. My question relates to gendered impacts on climate change, as it seems to me that for climate change adaptation to be successful, that the impacts and concerns on women need to be brought to the fore. Research has shown that gender inequalities have undermined the achievements of the Millennial Development Goals, and thus so has the ability to undermine the Sustainable Development Goals. I know it has been acknowledged that the integrity gender considerations to adequately address climate change is important, but the desire and will to see this as imperative looks to be too far lacking. Climate change and gender inequality are, in my mind, the two major challenges that is facing the Pacific, both of which have a monumental bearing on the Sustainable Development Goals. And in my mind, it's hard to see how any of the 17 goals will be successful without gender equality, specifically SDG 5.
Would you like Mary to address that question?
I'll get to the point.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
It's a great question, by the way.
Yes.
We can not, it appears for me, champion climate change at the same time as championing women's rights, yet watch how easily an ear will switch off when reproductive rights or gender-based violence or the lack of women's political participation and development is addressed. It has been well documented that women are more vulnerable due to climate change.
Thank you. Could we let Mary address that? Because this is right at the heart of much of your
It's a wonderful
combination
question.
of
It's a
work.
wonderful question. I think it's so appropriate that
Thank
that
you.
you ask it. And it is absolutely true. The gender dimensions of climate change are huge because the role of women and men in many, many societies is very different. Women have to put food on the table, they have to go for the firewood, they have to, or they grow different vegetables and the different vegetables are affected. It's just huge. And my foundation helped put together with women leaders a troika plus of women leaders on gender and climate change. The year after the Copenhagen summit, if some of you remember the Copenhagen summit in 2009, there was a summit in Cancun. And we had 3 women who were presiding over 3 conferences in a row. Connie Hedegaard in Copenhagen itself, Patricia Espinosa was to be in Cancun as foreign minister, and after that in South Africa, it would be the South African foreign minister. And those 3 women formed it. My foundation was the secretary of it. And we have worked on gender in the climate context since then. And in Doha, under a male president, the year after the 3 women, we got the man to agree to allow a decision to be taken on gender balance. And we even got him to throw up his hands and say, "What can I say? A mere man." He was faced with this, support for the idea. But now women ministers on gender are trying to get the voices of grassroots women into the system. And that is something we have been very supportive of. The real experts on climate change are very often grassroots women. They're the ones that hold their community together all over the world. I have a book coming out in September of stories, and 9 of the stories in the book are of women and 2 are of men. Not because I was choosing women, because women had better stories to tell of what they're doing about climate change. And it's quite extraordinary the role that grassroots women play. And if they come to a conference and are allowed to speak, they change the dynamic. I've seen it. There's a Maasai woman called Alice that we've brought a few times to a conference, and she's very articulate. She's from Kenya. She's an absolute Maasai. She dresses beautifully in the Maasai clothing, but she's very, very articulate. And she talks about her community, and it just changes everybody's understanding of climate change, literally. So thank you for the question. It was a great question.
Thank you. Anyone else with a question? Thank you. Microphone coming. Thank you. Put your hand up and we'll get mics roving. Thank you. If anyone else would like to ask. Please, ma'am.
Hello. Yes, my question is regarding AI, artificial intelligence. Mrs. Ardern, this is specifically for you. Knowing the impact that this is going to have on the workforce in New Zealand, how do you envision the transition to that, the arrival of artificial intelligence, the retraining of the people that will be impacted, and to alleviate the pain that's associated with it?
So this relates directly to something that we started doing some work on while we were in opposition. We brought together a group of wonderful experts across employee representative groups, business groups and so on, and called it the Future of Work Commission, because we didn't want to be in a position in the future where we had New Zealanders feeling insecure, looking to us for answers and have us shrugging our shoulders. The thing that really stuck out to me from that piece of work was that we can't really predict the future. There was a period, I think, in the past where we'd say, well, the next wave is going to be biotechnology, or it's going to, and we used to, the knowledge wave, we tried to predict where everything was heading and then plan for it. Now I think we've accepted that the future is hugely unpredictable, but what we can prepare is our workforce. We can make them adaptable. We can ensure that in our schools we're teaching not STEM but STEAM. We're encouraging creativity, problem solving, collaboration, the things that actually will mean that they are better equipped to deal with this changing work environment. And so for me, the key is education and retraining. We talk a lot about just transitions here as well. So one of the things that we did, which actually, I know was a real sticking point for some people last election, was to talk about 1 year of free education. A lot of people fixated on the school leavers who'd go to university. The numbers we did told us that the biggest group who could potentially benefit were the people who are already in the workforce, who have never studied before, who might go to Polytech or a wānanga or become an apprentice and be able to do that for free, and that would make a huge difference to their decision to retrain and prepare them for the future. So for us, that investment in education and saying, look, secondary is not enough anymore, in the same way that Peter Fraser said secondary school needed to be where we had all of our students. Now it's the next step. We all need to engage in lifelong learning. We need to switch the lights back on at our night schools. We need to make that post-secondary education accessible, and that's how we prepare for the future.
Okay, so one or two more? Fritz, one or two more? Ma'am.
So we've been talking about change at a global level, at a national level. Now, if I could just drill down a bit and ask for both of your advice to each of us as citizens at a local and community level, what kind of things do you see succeed when we think about change for the things that affect us, right here and right now in our lives? Undoubtedly, central government policy does affect our lives, but so does what's happening here in our communities, and we all have an opportunity to influence that. So just again, based on your experience, any advice for us, and maybe even commenting on that relationship between central government, local government, and community grassroots effort that can really make the difference?
Well, I can't obviously comment in any knowledgeable way about Wanaka, although this is my third visit. I came here to New Zealand first because New Zealand was the first country to give the parliamentary vote to women. And then I made a state visit. On both occasions came to Wanaka because my my brother has a batch here, and
A crib.
And this third visit was because he now has 6 grandchildren, and I had to see them. But when I was seeking votes in Ireland as a nominee of the Labour Party in Ireland to be the president, a very outside chance. In fact, the bookies made me 100 to 1 chance of being elected when I started. I went around Ireland in 1990, and I learned about my country in a way that stunned me. I learned about community self-development. It was quite extraordinary. Ireland had become more, there was more money around because of the common agricultural policy of the European Union. It had spread money to towns and villages out of cities. But people didn't have the facilities. They didn't have the workplace for children, the creches for children. They didn't have the young facilities, the youth facilities. They didn't have the facilities for the elderly. And they knew that the government wasn't going to provide them, that we weren't at that stage. So communities started to do this. And it was an extraordinary time of community self-development. Ireland kind of grew out of that, and it got to the stage of the Celtic Tiger, where nobody was working for nothing, in their community. Everybody needed to be paid and more than paid. And there was a certain loss. We have a word for working in your community, which is a spirit of mehel, which is a bit like Ubuntu in African countries. I am because you are. You are my neighbor, so I work with you and for you. And in that period, from 1990 to 1994, 95, 96, when we got progressively more profitable, that was an extraordinary energy. And I represented that as president locally and then nationally. And I felt that it was one of the extraordinary strengths. When we got our downturn fiscally, that energy came back. And we had the spirit of Mehel in poor, fractured communities. And I can't speak for New Zealand, but there's something terribly important about a local community having that sense of community and of being able to either build up or finding. And also this festival is part of that sense of community. I'm a great admirer of the fact that you have in Wanaka annually this Aspiring Conversations Festival, because the arts play a huge, huge role in the life of a community and in conversations. You're all here listening. You're not watching television or on social media or out doing sport or whatever you normally do. You're actually listening to a conversation. And I think that's all part of a community strength, which I would admire.
That is one of the upsides of campaigning.
Yeah.
You do get it, all walks of life, and it's actually one of the things that probably politicians don't talk enough about, door knocking.
Yeah.
I find door knocking such an extraordinary experience. There's something about the physical act of going right up to someone's front door and having that moment of time on their doorstep. If you're lucky, you might get to the dining table and have a cup of tea. If you're really lucky, you won't get a door in the face. But that insight is extraordinary. And you know, I remember once door knocking through a retirement, a pensioner village in Auckland, and going from door to door. These were very small units, and I was invited into quite a few of them, and in each of them it was, the lounge had a small single bed in them, and the kitchen was very small, and everything obviously had just been designed for someone's full life to be brought down into this compact little space. And there were common themes. Every one of them were overflowing. Photos of family and friends. The men often beer out at 10 o'clock in the morning. In this one particular village, I remember, that's really striking me, and that sense of isolation amongst that community. Those memories, those experiences really stick with me. And since then, I've become obsessed with this idea of how is it that our people become socially isolated in their communities, be they old or young, be they sole parents, and what is it that breaks down social isolation? I have a vision that one day we'll have a place where we'll have this expectation that everyone is either earning, learning, caring, or volunteering. So if you think about the things that allow us to have that social connection and ensure we don't have that sense of isolation, it's the things that we get dignity from, or that we get a sense of fulfillment from. And they're either, from our work, or from the care that we give, or from the volunteering roles that we have, or from our education. And if you're not doing one of those things, then you might be someone who has a beer at 10 in your pensioner village. And so that, for me, I think that's the next road I'd like to see us going down as well, because that sense of community,
and that's another problem of
identifying problems together, I think is driven by connection.
And that's another problem of those left behind communities. Yes. Very much. Yeah.
One more question. There's a gentleman here, if you're okay with that. Thank you very much. Please, sir.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for your engaging insights. My name's Dave Henley. I'm from the Centre for Sustainability at Otago University. My question is the importance or not, and how to do this, of establishing compelling stories that not only are about small or individual topics, but can reach across the sort of greater vision of where society is going in the 21st century. How do you generate that in a way to generate step change rather than incremental steps, which are also important, in a way that still gives people space to be themselves and express their own cultures and ideas, but can really compel us to really move and address these issues that we're talking about today? So I've had inspiration from people like Jeremy Rifkin and his ideas around the Third Industrial Revolution, which I know have been embraced in Europe, and by people like Chancellor Merkel. How do we do that in New Zealand? Is that important? And would that make a difference in really moving? Yeah, at a level.
Absolutely. In fact, I think New Zealanders are greatly moved by stories, because often, they're putting a human face, or element to an issue. You know, we've obviously had homelessness in New Zealand for a lot of years. It's not a new issue. If you live in or visit the cities, you'd see rough sleepers constantly. I noticed a fundamental step change in the way that people perceive that issue when they saw images of kids in cars. You know, I almost felt this shift where suddenly people were really asking hard questions around, this just isn't right. This is now taken on a different, and yet probably we had a bit of that persistent problem for some time, but suddenly when people saw it, everything was stripped bare and it was just a simple question of that's not right and it's not fair, and it was the images and the stories that really stuck in people's mind. I think storytelling is key. I think storytelling in politics is key. It's and on some of those big issues as well, because we can all talk about numbers till we're blue in the face, but it's stories that move people. That's why I think when I leave politics, I'd love to make a documentary one day. Oddly, about the refugees of Western Sahara. We'll probably talk about that later. But storytelling, I think, is fundamental. I agree with
Well, it allows me to plug my book again. I mean,
It's stories. I believe it's called Stories.
Yeah, it's called
Where will we find
it's Climate Justice. It's not out yet. It'll be published in September.
Online?
But it actually is something I've come to, that if you frighten people with the science or frighten them with they just switch off and say it's too big for me. And it's only the stories of the resilience. Let me tell you one brief story which I love in the thing. It's a story of a woman, Sami, from northern Sweden. She's a member of the indigenous Sami people, a reindeer farmer. She's also a chemistry major from a university, but she still, you know, she farms. And she dresses in her beautiful traditional dress. And we were in the European Parliament together. I'd actually managed with my foundation to get her into the European Parliament on a panel on gender, back to gender, and climate justice. And she talked about her work as a reindeer farmer. And she said, there was no problem for us when it was always cold in winter, because the reindeer can smell the nurture through many, many feet of snow, and they can feed themselves. But now the problem is, it's cold, and then it becomes warm, and then it becomes cold again, and a thin layer of ice goes on top of the snow, and the reindeer can't smell through the ice. So they go further, and they die, and the herders follow them, and they die. And we've had a lot of problems, and I mean, everything has changed for us, etc. She went on like this, and the Parliament committee room was absolutely silent listening to her. 26-year-old, you know, chemistry major and reindeer farmer. And then she stops and pauses and looks around. She says, so I am very glad, she said, quite gently, I'm very glad that you are now having a discussion in this European Parliament on gender and climate change. Pause. What took you so long? Brilliant.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I mean,
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking. Could you take one more? Because there's something about this young lady right sitting here that just, her question should be heard. One more and then we will wrap. But please go ahead. Thank you.
Hello. Am I on?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, so I've just picked up on a few key points that I've heard tonight, being grassroots women, climate change, storytellers, child poverty and parenting. And I can think of one person who is all of these things, who embodies all of these things, and that's the midwife. And I'd like to say, what's your opinion on midwifery in New Zealand and this midwifery crisis? And yeah.
Well, based on the fact that I just last week had my 2-hour personalised intensive antenatal session with my midwife. At the moment, they bring me images of horror. But I know I'm about to have a very special bond with that lady.
I'm a student midwife.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. You know, midwifery in New Zealand, gosh, what a journey they've gone on, and what a fight they had to go through to have the standing that they have now. And they're going through another one now. And that's really mid-train. I've asked the Ministry of Health to really bring me up to speed where things are at, and it is in a bit of a process at the moment. But I hope, of course, what we see at the end of it, as I do with nurses and teachers and police, that we recognise their value and the role that they play in our society. And we can, obviously, that happens through multiple means. Yes, through the way they're remunerated and the way that actually there's a disparity in the way DHB's funded midwives and those who work independently, but you'd know that. Yes, in the way that they're funded, but actually the way we treat them as society. You know, I wouldn't be Prime Minister right now if it wasn't for my fourth form social studies teacher, Gregor Fountain. And so I talk about Gregor all of the time because I want the status of people like our health professionals and our teachers and like our midwives to be honoured. And money is one way we value them, but actually the status we give them in our communities is another, and that's important too.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me. What a wonderful way to start a weekend of rich conversations. Please join me in thanking our guests, Mary Robinson and Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. There's a wonderful weekend ahead of you. Mary is back in another session tomorrow. I'm not sure if that's sold out yet, but there's plenty more to come. Lovely to see you tonight. Enjoy your evening and hope to see you again over the weekend. Bye-bye.